Base where there's a problem, or what's your general understanding?
Well, as far as the alien Bible, I don't know what you're really talking about. Some of the briefings that I read dealt with some of that information about, it's being the product of a genetic modification.
Right.
But that's about all. That's about all that I know. The repercussions, the big story, all that. All that I really have no idea about.
Well, I meant, like you mentioned a date when they were supposed to return. Is something supposed to happen when they return?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It was just a date, and it was a number that made no sense to me. It was a 601 or 30 something. Obviously in a different numerical system.
And so, other than having created us and then the genetic upgrades, that's it as far as that's
supposedly, if that information is correct, yeah.
I'm interested in a little bit more about the physics of the power generation from the development of the antimatter to the gravity A wave and the amplification and that process of the generation of that and being able to fold space. Can you repeat the question, please?
That's a pretty lengthy explanation.
In other words, the relationship between the development of antimatter and the gravitational force field.
Well, I can give you, I guess, a brief overview of essentially how that works. If you want an in-depth description of that, you can give me your address and I can send you a paper on it. Essentially, what the reactor does is provide electrical power and the base gravity wave to amplify, and it does that by interacting matter and antimatter, essentially. The way it does that is injecting an accelerated proton into a piece of 115 that spontaneously generates antihydrogen, essentially. That's reacted in a small area. It's a compressed gas, probably a compressed atmospheric gas, and the antimatter reacting with matter produces the energy, mainly heat energy, and that is converted into electrical energy by a thermionic generator that appeared to be 100% efficient, which is a difficult concept to believe anyway. Also, the reactor has two functions. That's one of them. The other function is it provides the basic gravity wave that's amplified, and that appears at the upper sphere of the amplifier itself, and that's tapped off with a waveguide similar to microwaves, and is amplified and focused, essentially.
So how is the electrical energy related to the amplification of the gravitational A wave energy?
The electrical energy is transmitted essentially without wires, and I related it to almost a Tesla setup. It seemed like each subcomponent on the craft was attuned to the frequency that the reactor was operating at. So essentially the amplifiers themselves received the electrical energy like a Tesla coil transmits power to a fluorescent tube. What was the rest of the question?
Yeah, in other words, what is the relationship between, I think you basically answered it.
Yeah, that's how the amplifiers receive the power, and through the waveguide they receive the basic wave. It's very, very similar to a microwave amplifier. And, for more technical description, I can send you drawings or things along those lines, but that's basically how it works.
I understand you took some 115 home with you to do some testing on your own.
I obtained it, yeah.
Did you document any of your testing?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, the video, mostly videotape and things like that.
John said it was stolen from you later. Last night he said...
They stole it back.
Stole it back, he said?
Well, there's another level to that, but like I said, right now it's in private hands.
Okay.
Element 115, John said last night that a wedge that's about 2 inches in length will run the ship up to 30 years. How does that go in light years? How long would that be?
Well, it really depends on the energy level. The more energy you expend, the greater consumption of fuel, just like in any modern machine. So it really all depends on the amount of energy you request out of it.
Dr. Keller's relationship to S-4, do you think he might be working on antimatter weaponry?
I don't know, but he was certainly, I forgot what his exact title was. He was chief consultant or something along those lines. And as far as antimatter weaponry, I don't think anyone was involved in that. There was certainly some beam weapon work, and Teller's been involved with that. I think his last project at Livermore, Los Alamos was, I think he called it Super Excalibur, and that was essentially a nuclear bomb detonated in orbit and fiber optic light guides that directed X-rays to incoming warheads, and that's his pet project. He loves that thing, so I don't think he'd jump to antimatter weapons. All the way in the back there.
On your sports tunnel that you worked on, what do you think was on level 3, and where were the bathrooms?
I don't know if anything was on level, well, I don't know if there were any bathrooms. On level 3, I can only guess, and I would imagine that there was some sort of navigational equipment or their version of a computer or something along those lines, because I saw nothing else that controlled the amplifiers, the directions they pointed at.
Bob, how do you foresee that mankind can develop this type of machine?
I really don't. I really don't, without access to certain materials. Or maybe new manufacturing techniques that can produce those, but until those problems are solved, the fact that we even know how to deal with it or even duplicate it, is pretty useless.
How many other materials might be necessary besides 115 that you know of that were contained on the ship?
That might be it. The rest of it might be just essentially polishing up manufacturing techniques, making things smaller. Just general increase in technology, getting a small accelerator running at a higher energy level. I don't know about the metallurgy aspect of the craft. I don't think any exotic metals are necessary, though they may be employed. I imagine you could make a craft out of aluminum if necessary, but what part that plays, I don't know.
Is there any significance to the saucer shape, the geometry, having to do with any resonance or anything of that nature?
Not any resonance, but it's important most of the edges on the craft are rounded, because a high voltage field does appear at most of the craft, except for the last upper bump. There's a little ring before that. Now I'm only talking about one craft, so I don't know about the rest, but there's a small ring before that, a darker black one, and that's an insulator ring, and that's the only place above that upper section, the third level, is where high voltage does not appear.
Did any technology that came from the aliens resemble anything that we can do today? Have we advanced to any degree that they are?
Well, there are some basic things. The fact that they're using a little accelerator, a little bit smaller, we have things like that, if that's what you're getting at.
Anything really advanced?
Well, as far as controlling gravity waves.
Yeah, other than the fact of just the way the craft operates, by manipulating gravity, that's about it, really.
Bob, I wanted to ask you, talking about metallurgy, what you observed in terms of the structure, the skin of it, the thickness, because there were reports from Roswell and otherwhere that there was a very thin type of metal skin that was really undamageable and so on. What was this construction of it like?
Well, I called it metal, and I really can't say that's what it was. I called it metal because I slid my hand across it, and it was cold, and it was lustrous. So.
Did you notice any place like where, on an edge or something where it may have been a lot thinner than your standard metals that are aluminum that's used in aircraft?
It's hard from the outside. You can't tell.
No,
when you walk in, the way the archways are inside, they're probably about 4 inches thick anyway, so you really can't tell how thin the skin is itself, or if it's exotic or inside.
Yes, more on this element 115 and your contention that it couldn't be made here on Earth. What if you found the right bombardment speed, the right target shape, and the right containment?
Well, I imagine with enough time you can make a small amount of it. I mean, my analogy is look at You know, look at how long it takes to make gold in an accelerator from bismuth or something like that.
But that may just be a technology that hasn't advanced far enough yet to do that.
Right, but the bottom line is you have to sit there and plug in protons and neutrons, for that matter, into an existing atom, and you have to do it, you know, essentially on an individual basis, and they're not all going to catch on. Some are going to.
But how do you think they got their first piece of it? If it was in a dead star, how going from?
I think it was naturally occurring somewhere
on their planet.
Just because it's stable, yeah, probably so. That's just a guess on my part, but you know, if that technology was harnessed quick enough, chances are they didn't have, you know, when they came here, our levels of technology were probably fairly new to them. They probably never been considered an internal combustion engine, or for that matter, you know, when they came flying into the atmosphere and saw little cigar-shaped things with fire coming out the back, they probably couldn't conceive of how they were powered. So it was, you know, it just all depends how, you know, what materials, raw materials you have. But, you know, that's just an opinion that was a naturally occurring element.
Are you aware of any long-distance flight tests that have been done on any of the discs?
As of the time that I was there, I was told that they really didn't take them any great distance at all, other than right outside the...
Have you heard the rumor of the pilots that were killed by flying the atmosphere?
No.
If we had a working agreement with the aliens at one time, why didn't they give us a user's manual for these ships? Why have we had to work so hard back engineering them?
I haven't the slightest idea. You know,
Any assistance at all with any of the technology and learning it?
I really don't know. You know,
The manual-
it almost seems like there had to have been some assistance or some information found, but who knows?
Your information didn't indicate that. though.
No.
Yeah, with such tight security around there, supposedly only 500 pounds of this material, how is it somebody can get some of it out of there?
Because some of the the material is that they have there is essentially raw. The material is, it has to be machined into discs. These discs have to be stacked up and then cut into a cone shape and then sliced along the long axis of it. That work is done at Los Alamos. I'm not exactly sure Los Alamos knows what they're doing. Apparently they think that they're developing the little coins they're working on is some new type of armor. And having worked at Los Alamos and know people around that area, that's how I obtained some of it.
Thank you. Can you say anything about Project Looking Glass and the relationship between gravity and time?
Well, gravity and time are almost essentially the same thing. And Looking Glass dealt with using gravity essentially to distort time, and as I've said before, I really know very little about that, but you know, they were only talking about milliseconds or even less microseconds of time distortion. They're not like looking back in time to see who killed Kennedy or something.
The craft that are you talking about, the scout craft, is that the one that's like the Adamski picture with the 3 domes underneath? And if it's not,
I'm not exactly sure of the Adamski
okay,
picture.
it's the saucer shape that has.
This is the one
balls.
that looks like one of the Meyer craft.
Right.
Did you see any others than that one, or is there 9 up there?
Yeah, I saw 9 total, but that's the only one I got close enough to.
Did you see the one with the 3 domes underneath that, 3 balls underneath that has the central housing underneath?
No.
And then the second question was, did anybody give you any indication as to who was driving or any information on that?
I assume that it was humans that were piloting the craft, though it could have been remote control, but at the one test flight that I saw on the ground, they were in radio communication with someone, and I assumed it was someone in the craft. I mentioned it's possible that it could have been a remote observer somewhere, but I just assumed that the seats were retrofitted, or they were sitting on the floor for that matter.
Are you familiar with, I have a couple aspects of the question. Are you familiar with Howard Menger's Electrocraft and Otis Carr's saucer design, and how are their devices, how do they generate their gravity fields compared with what you described? And lastly, can you speculate how why the commercialization of some of these crafts hasn't been possible with so many different patents applied for these kinds of design craft?
Because they don't work.
Are there any G forces encountered
No.
by the pilots inside the craft?
I don't know.
No, no, no.
From your interviews, you seem to feel that the Area 51 or the S-4 test site was kind of slipshod in how it does its research. It really doesn't have the facilities there to actually do the research correctly. And also, I'm wondering, could you comment about that? And also, I'm wondering what you could tell us about the other types of ships you saw there that you felt were alien in origin.
Well, as far as the research at S-4, that was kind of slipshod. Just because mainly it was being done from a military point of view. If anything, it was a weapons development program, and they were more concerned about with duplicating the technology, not really duplicating the technology, duplicating the hardware, as opposed to back engineering the technology to find out, you know, how these theories actually work and you know, what's going on with them. And so they really weren't taking the scientific approach, and that was causing some dissension. I don't remember the second part of the question.
Just what other types of ships did you see that might have been alien in origin?
I only saw them, and they varied in shape, but I was told they had the same identical power and propulsion system, and that's the extent of my knowledge on that.
What about shape?
They varied completely in shape.
Yeah, on you had the military out there supposedly working with the aliens. Did you ever get an inference from them that it was a positive or a negative situation? In other words, when they brought up, when they were talking about the aliens or whatever, was it a positive or a negative type slant on the...
Well, they really didn't talk about the aliens. The only time I ever heard anybody mention anything about an alien, someone, and I'm just assuming that, someone called it, or called the thing, a gourd. And that was it. I heard it in the middle of a conversation, and they stopped talking when I got up to them, so that was the thing.
Just this question to the interior of the sports model. I know you have made reference to the power source in the center of the craft, and there were small seats that were low to the ground. How about consoles or displays or any kind of instrumentation?
Nothing along those lines, but what I call the console, there are 3 seats. If you look at the bottom level, there's the 3 amplifiers in a triad formation. Directly above each one is something I call a console, and I think that's a secondary part to the amplifier. And an analogy to that would be the actual amplifier, and the thing hanging underneath would kind of be a speaker if you're talking on audio terms. So.
Is there any kind of control or lights or indicators?
No.
No on switch?
Not that I could find.
Did it seem like there was any place or even a need for a life support of any kind on these?
Not that it was obvious to me.
2 questions. How do they navigate, and how do we converse with them?
I haven't the slightest idea how they navigate. You know, like I said, I think if that whatever controls the configuration of the amplifier is the focusing, which is basically their navigation, is most probably on the upper level of the craft that I didn't get to look at. And as far as the conversation between them, your guess is as good as mine.
Was the local means of propulsion the same as this across great space differences? What was the local means of propulsion?
The local means of propulsion is essentially them balancing on an out-of-phase gravity wave. And it's not as stable as you would think. When the craft took off, it wobbled to some degree. It's, I mean, a modern-day Hawker Harrier or something along those lines, a vertical takeoff craft, is much more stable than them in the Omicron configuration, which is that mode of travel. The Delta configuration is where they use the 3 amplifiers. And those are the only 2 methods I know about for moving the craft.
Can one pilot, as far as you know, pilot this craft, or does it take 3, or do you know anything about that?
I don't know. Oh, and back in the red?
Yeah.
You're both in the red.
L-15, was that stable? In other words, does it give off the radiation, or can you hold it?
No, it's stable.
Stable, so you hold it right in your hand?
Yeah, theoretically, elements should reach a stability around anywhere from 113 to 116, somewhere in there, and apparently that's true. And again, they should reach a stability somewhere up around 220 some odd. But whether those elements will ever be synthesized or found naturally. Yeah, it's unusually heavy. Yeah.
I want to know what you think of monuments in Mars, and do you think we have bases also?
Do I think we have bases? No. The monuments of Mars are interesting. That's about the most I can say. They're suspicious, and I really don't know until there's more information. I've seen pictures of them and things along those lines, but the most recent Mars probe is taking low-altitude photographs of those, so I guess everyone will know in about a year. Indirectly, yeah.
What about your perception of time and length, width and height? Is it the same aboard the craft as off of it? Why do you want aboard compared to when you went off of it?
Well, you went aboard it or went off of it. Well, as long as you're on the craft, everything seems completely normal to you. Time flows at a normal rate, and if you're off the craft and you're comparing the time of someone in the craft, someone off the craft, there'll be a definite difference there. Anything where gravity's involved. Even the shuttle astronauts, they'll come back just because of the difference in gravity. When they come back, there'll be a slight difference in time.
Did you learn of any other well-known civilian scientists who are involved in this?
Yes, not involved in this, but involved in the gravity work. And he's at Los Alamos, and we've had a little bit of contact.
You name names?
I'd rather not, just because so far no one's bothering him, and I'm sure he wants to keep it that way.
You said that the scene on the craft would become transparent. You said the wall inside the craft would become transparent.
Only one place, yeah.
Only one, so the whole craft can become transparent?
No, there's only one place where the seats faced, and it, there again, I said that's advanced technology, but it's not that advanced because, we have something along the lines of that liquid crystal that we could, make transparent and also use as, a display of sorts. So that's, but this was metallic, and we haven't anything along the lines of the toughness of, metal that you could drill into that can become transparent.
What was the time period when the walls became transparent and salt synthesis?
Probably about 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, two related questions. Are you aware of any instances where the inside of an alien craft was much larger than its apparent outside?
No, I've heard stories like that, though, but I haven't.
If I can just follow that up.
The strong force which you've identified with gravity A, I know there's been some recent theories that propose actually an 11-dimensional universe with 7 of them rolled up.
I'm not buying that.
Does it operate on any principle related to that?
Yeah, my main problem with that, and Stephen Hawking for that matter, is that once you start creating other dimensions, it's like an excuse. I mean, in particle physics, they do that too. When they can't figure out something, they say, well, we don't know what gravity is. Well, it's caused by the graviton. Yeah, they make up particles like that. And you can do that with dimensions too. Well, where'd it go? I went into another dimension. Yeah, it's like an excuse. The bottom line is, as everyone has said, every physicist has said, the answer to everything is always simple. And there's not an 11-dimensional universe. It does. First of all, there doesn't need to be, because all this technology works, one-dimensional, essentially a 4-dimensional universe, and there's no need for it.
Yes, I have two questions, please. You said in your video tape that you do work from Las Vegas to Groom Lake, is that right?
Yeah.
How did you get from Groom Lake down?
In a bus.
The facility on the other side of Groom Lake, on the east side of Groom Lake, are you familiar with that?
On the east side of Groom Lake. Across the lake?
Yes.
No, I've never been over there.
Did you get anything of the work that was done on the west side of Groom Lake?
No.
Bob, getting back to his question about if there is any difference between being on the inside of a craft while it's under power versus being on the outside of a craft. Of course, you wouldn't have experienced that because you were never on the craft when it was powered, right? Under power.
Well, by the fact that the screen became transparent and other things were operational, I can assume that there was some power generated. So
I see.
So,
okay. Huh.
Bob, how long were you a part of the S-4 project, and how key of a person were you on the science team that studied these vehicles?
I was probably there only 6 months, 4 months, something like that. It's hard to remember. And as far as a key person, I'm sure I was the last rung on the ladder. Though, because no one has really gotten anywhere, you know, they were looking to me for fresh ideas, which I really didn't have anything because I didn't know what, you know, really was going on or where they had been. So it was a very disorganized group, and that's really all I can relay. I don't know how else to describe it.
It was frustrating in that regard.
Very frustrating.
Element 115, does it have emission lines?
Does it have emission lines?
Spectral.
Well, I imagine it does. Every other element does, yeah.
That you know of?
Well, no, I haven't seen, you know, any spectrographic analysis on it, or well, actually, they did do it. I don't know if I saw it though. I saw a neutron bombardment test and density measurements and things like that, but I'm sure they carried out that test on it. But I wouldn't be able to identify the lines. No.
You're not aware of the results?
You know, they probably showed them to me, but I can't, for the life of me, remember after 4 years.
It's actually occurring, you expect to see them start?
Possibly in heavier stars or in, you know, planets that surround a larger star system. And in fact, some people brought up that you know, that's ridiculous because, you know, all the elements that we know of are found on Earth, and that's not true. I think it's technium or something along those lines is not found on Earth, and it's on the periodic chart, so it's not that.
Something is in the sky.
What?
Hello, Dad.
And Doug, and they mapped it out in the south of France. They looked back and looked, and it has to fall where the natural belt of uranium is there. And I was wondering if, you know, you had anything that would lead you from what you saw with that propulsion system to think that aliens may have come here at one time to do that.
I don't know. I mean, no matter what, uranium is certainly a valuable,
right,
you know, element.
Okay.
I don't know.
Did you get to see any aliens at all?
No.
Back when you were talking about low-level flight, you were talking about a wobble.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen the Billy Meyer movies? Something similar to that?
The Billy Meyer movies.
Of the disc wobbling?
Films.
There's quite a few films of discs.
I don't think I've ever seen any motion.
Yeah, he's got some that fly around a tree, and they've got some.
Oh wait, I did see that. Yeah, I did see that.
And then there's some other hovering ones where they wobble.
You know what's strange about the Billy Meyer photographs? That the discs, that one of the ones he took a picture of, looks exactly like the one that I looked on, but yeah, I'm certainly not an expert in the field, but some of those look unbelievably fake. And I can't, especially the thing with it flying around the tree. I mean, boy, it looks like it's hanging from a string. But, you know, but why would he do that if he had some authentic pictures? And you know, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that.
How do you feel about, or do you have an opinion of this conflict that allegedly happened between Grays and the Delta Force in, what was it, 89 or whatever? Have you heard anything about that?
I really don't really have an opinion. I just, you know, repeat it.
You think it really took place?
Boy, I don't know.
Any weapons on these ships?
Yeah, apparently there's one, but I was involved in the project that dealt with it.
And what's your next video going to cover?
Well, it's really not a next video. There's the video that I made is being redone by another company only because they liked it so much, and they're just redoing the graphics and making it a little more technical, and you know, I'm just serving as a technical advisor on it. But for the most part, it's 60 to 70% of it's, you know, the identical thing. They just wanted to do it because these particular group of guys involved. I think the company's called DreamQuest, involved in special effects. We're really into the UFO thing, and they wanted to do it with modern day stuff instead of, you know, knit stockings and things like that. Well, that's certainly possible. You know, I don't have any information on that, but just by the EMP generated, you know, by the systems on the craft, that makes perfect sense to me.
I was going to ask you, what type of weapon do they have?
It's some sort of directed energy weapon, and I think it's a...
like a laser beam?
Well, no, a particle weapon, probably a neutron.
How many levels does that S-4 have, do you know? Just one, or just below ground, or?
There might be two, but I know there's one, because obviously I was on one, but I can't actually remember if there was any direct mention from there of there being a lower level. But you know, I really wasn't allowed to roam freely around the whole place, so I don't know. You know, I really don't know.
Could you tell us about your education? Not just a couple of different conflicting things I might hear from you.
That varies widely. As far as electronic technology, my degree there is from Caltech, and physics is from MIT.
When did you graduate?
Did you go to Pierce College?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, let's just
Where did you hear that?
A friend said something that, you know, somebody I don't even know. I just thought, well, that's something I want to ask because it cleared my mind.
Yeah, I went to Pierce and Northridge, and then I'm terrible at dates. I don't remember what date I was at Pierce. Probably like in '76 or something. I was at Pierce, and then '77 or '8. I went to Northridge just for a short time for some classes, and I was at Caltech, and then MIT after that.
Yeah, some critics have suggested that there is not a Department of Naval Intelligence as shown on your IRS record. I wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, I've heard people say that before, but the bottom line is if you, and I've let other people check into that. Bob Exler is a guy that managed to trace that down through the IRS, and if you write the zip code number on the bottom of it, or NC-101 or something like that, or NC something, anyway, it gets to somewhere in the Navy. You know, as far as if there's a department of there, I don't know, but you know, that's the W-2 that I got sent. So.
Well, that same person was saying though that the zip code that was on there was someone that was in reserve, unused in Washington, some zip code.
That was unused?
Yeah.
Well, no, he had correspondence with someone in the Navy through that address.
I'm not talking about Bob Exler. I'm talking about Bill Moore.
Oh, Bill Moore.
Yeah.
I don't know. Bill Moore.
I know he's an enigma himself.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that was his point.
I guess he disputes everything I say. He said, "Well, there's two different types on here, and this and that." I said, "Well, you know, I don't know." So, you know, that's basically what I get sent, and you know, I've seen enough information to where that zip code works, and that's all the information I have. I really haven't pursued it myself.
But maybe you clarify for them why you think this is a legitimate document because of the certain elements of it that are correct.
Oh, because of the amount of money.
Right.
Yeah, no one would know the amount of money except me. You know,
And that was
people
correct.
that, you know, so that's all the information I've got on it.
Well, I have two questions. They're not related to each other, but one is, are they silent or noiseless? And B, who signed your paychecks?
As far as are they silent or noiseless, there's a slight hiss before they take off, and up to a certain altitude, and that sounds like a high voltage hiss of sorts. That's all the sounds that I've heard. I've heard lots of reports about, you know, weird flying saucer type sounds, but you know, I've never encountered that. Who signed my paycheck? There was a signature on it, but I don't know, you know, whose it was. It never even, you know, at the time that I cashed the paycheck, it never even concerned me tracing anything down.
So there wasn't a company name up in the corner like most paychecks?
Well, when I worked for the federal government years ago, all you get is a green Treasury check. There would be no other papers with it or anything from the Department of Treasury.
No, this said the Department of Naval Intelligence on it.
On the check?
Yeah, on the check.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bob, when a craft like that comes into our atmosphere, would you expect a loud report that might be exploding?
Well, it's solely dependent on the velocity that it enters. So if you're dealing with something that manipulates gravity and doesn't have to slingshot into the Earth, you can come in at a low speed, not heat up, not really encounter
But it's
any.
velocity dependent, is that so?
Right. Well, yeah, if you're traveling at supersonic, then you get a report. If you're not, you don't. It's pretty straightforward.
When you were at S-4, to your knowledge, what was the approximate percentage of civilian versus military personnel, and in what kind of job categories?
The civilian personnel were scientific in nature, and the military personnel were only security. And as far as the percentage, it was a small percentage of scientific to military personnel.
Are there any secretaries?
I'm sure there were offices all over the place, but when I came into the facility, I was essentially escorted right to where I work and worked there, other than the few amount of times that I got to walk into the hangar and under an escort too, and when I left it was the same. So like I said, there might be offices, there might be bunkers in there might be underground levels, there might be an alien nest in there. I have no idea. Excuse me?
How did you eat?
The only place I ever ate was at Area 51. So if there was a cafeteria there, I never got to eat in it.
You come and go with other people?
I usually came with Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor. Now, I wasn't on a full-time swing, essentially. I flew in usually between 4 and 5 o'clock at night and left by 11. So I was only there for a short time each day.
Bob, aboard the bus from Groom Lake to Papoose, how many people were boarding with you?
Very few.
More than yourself?
It's me and Dennis, and usually, well, actually not usually, occasionally one other person.
How about Barry?
I don't think I ever saw Barry on the bus.
Just two of you?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance that any of the workers might defect?
Barry would. That's why I spent some time trying to get a hold of him, and there was actually some time after all this hit the news and the whole thing went down, we got a call from Dennis, my supervisor, and he arranged a meeting at the Union Plaza Hotel. And when we got there, I brought 3 people with me, and I think he said he'd be in the casino area somewhere, and we went. I think Gene Huff came with me, and we went into the area. And walking down the corridor, I recognized one of the security personnel from there. And then when I finally found Dennis, he didn't even acknowledge my presence. We couldn't get his attention, and I left. So apparently, someone had known of the conversation and sent someone down there and made themselves obvious to Dennis, or something happened, and we left. But I think that was where Dennis really wanted to say something.
I understand that you used hypnotic regression to get at some of the details of your experience. If so, what is your impression of hypnotic regression as a tool?
It's probably reasonable because there are specifics. They contend that you can sit there and reread a document as if you had, as if you were there reading it for the first time. And what I was mainly interested in was in some of the schematics and drawings. And I did some of the hypnosis stuff with Lane Keck, the hypnotherapist in town, and I was certainly able to redraw a lot of the schematics and engineering drawings along those lines. And it's so as far as using it as a tool for that seems to work. For anything else, I don't know.
I have two things. One's a comment, the other one's a question. First of all, when I was 12 years old, I saw a daylight flying disc, which looked exactly like one of Billy Meyer's photographs 15 years later. And this just...
You mean earlier?
No, earlier, 15 years earlier, I saw this disc, and then Billy Meyer took a photo in 1975 with exactly the same disc that I saw, down to the last detail. It was the same. And then you said that the sport model looked a lot like this same photo in an interview with George Knapp. And I thought that was really interesting because it kind of tied it all together for me. And then I just wanted to make that comment. And then the question I had was, what was the year of your graduation from MIT, and did you get a PhD?
No, it's a master's degree.
Just a master's.
The year, what was the year of graduation? Probably 82, because I think I left there.
Went to Los Alamos?
I went to Los Alamos.
Thanks.
Can you talk about the mind control that some people have said was used on you when you decided to leave, and also the threats?
What mind control would that be?
Like someone made a comment that you might have been victim of some sort of mind control, or
that came about by when I was first brought there. They had a doctor or nurse actually in medical setup there, and right after I had signed all the release papers and my first time out there, I went in and they did what I perceived to be an allergen test, because they put a grid on my arm and different, pricked me with different chemicals, and it was their contention that, well, boy, there's a lot of strange elements here and unusual things you'll be working on, so they're trying to see if you're going to have any adverse reaction to them. And I was given something to drink. I said it smelled like pine, which it did. That's the best way I can describe it. And a lot of people jumped on that, saying, aha, well, that's the mind control substance. When you leave work, you're going to forget everything. When you come back, you remember everything. But I think if anything, it was an anti-allergen drug or something along those lines.
how about the threats? What kind of threats being used?
Yeah, there's plenty of threats.
Well, I mean, can you specific like bodily harm or the loss of pension, or what kind of stuff?
Well, the loss of pension and jail time, that was part of signing the paperwork. As far as bodily harm, after they caught us the time I brought out John Lear and a couple other people up there, then they threatened me, and they really didn't get much reaction out of that. Then they threatened my wife at the time, and they really threw out everything they could, without physically, attacking me.
Well, that's what I was wondering. And once they knew it was really you, not Dennis or someone else or anything, why didn't they just arrest you under charges of, violating the act?
Well, they can't arrest me because they'd have to admit, that this is classified material.
Well, you were talking about.
Yeah, they'd have to release it. Why didn't they, kill me?
Right.
That I really don't know. Maybe that had to do with how I got the job, or referencing the connection to Ed Teller or something along those lines. But I don't know.
Were there any contractor names, departments, divisions that were mentioned or signs on the wall or anything like that referring to any companies or anything like that?
No, but I know EG&G had nothing to do with it. That's the only light I can shed on that.